Today marks the end of our special prayer week and also the end of our Dear God series. How has it been for you? Hopefully, you have been able to participate not simply by hearing the sermons, but also by engaging in prayer yourself. Did you get to write God a Dear God letter? Were you able to put into words some of your big questions? And if you did, were you able to engage in some listening prayer? Did God speak to you? If He did, and you feel okay about sharing what you heard, I'd love to hear from you. The bottom line is that God really loves us. And even the urge to reach out to Him in prayer is one of His gifts to us. In today's sermon, I want us to build on what we have been learning about prayer through this series and this past week by spending some time in Psalm 22. The Psalms collectively function as the prayer book of ancient Israel. They span the full range of human experience, from loss and grief to joy and celebration. Many, including the one we are looking at today, were written by King David, a man whose life story had many ups and downs. The Psalms are a wonderful resource for God's people down the ages, and they always repay prayerful examination. Psalm 22, which we have had read for us this morning, was written by David at some dark time in his life. We do not know when it was, although it is worth noting, because the Bible does tell us a lot about David's life, that it could have been at almost any number of low spots. Whenever it was, it starts out with a primal cry. My God, why have you forsaken me? That feeling of being alone and abandoned by someone we love is probably one of our earliest fears. Isn't there something of that in every child's cry as they wake in the night and discover that their parent is not right there with them? David's abandonment feels total. Why are you so far from saving me? So far from the words of my groaning. And although he is crying out all day and all night, his experience is that God is not answering him. This experience of the silence of God is not unusual. It was described by the 16th century mystic St. John of the Cross as the dark night of the soul, a season in the pursuit of God when the usual direction markers are stripped away. Imagine driving down a highway at night when suddenly not only your own headlights turn off, but all the street lights turn off too, and fog rolls in to obscure everything. Fortunately, the psalm does not finish there. David reminds himself and God just who God is. God is enthroned as the Holy One. God is the great King. He is the praise of Israel. He is the one in whom the patriarchs put their trust. He is the one to whom they cried out in their times of trouble and were given deliverance. When they trusted in God, they were not disappointed. Theologian Kevin J. Van Hooser notes that the life of the church is poised between memory and hope. I like that phrase. In this psalm, we see David in a place of great pain, but choosing to grip hard on memory, specifically the memory of God's working in time past. The main part of this psalm is David's complaint. Things are not going well. He feels more like a worm than a man. He is scorned, downtrodden, and despised. Those who observe the state he is in, rather than offering comfort, mock and insult him. What hurts the most is their mocking of his trust in God. But again, he looks back. God is the one who brought him out into life on the day he was born. He has been David's God from infancy. David yells louder for help. Do not be far from me, for trouble is near, and there is no one else able to help. David uses graphic animal imagery to describe his enemies. He pictures them as snorting bulls surrounding him. They are like roaring lions, intent on tearing him, their prey, apart. He describes himself as emptied and poured out like water, and his heart has melted within him like a candle before a flame. He is without strength, gasping for water, rolling about in the dust of death. His enemies are like a pack of dogs surrounding him. His hands and feet have been pierced. He is a barely alive skeleton. His attackers have stripped off his clothing and cast lots to win it. None of this sounds good. Having described his predicament, he desperately cries again for deliverance. O Lord, be not far off. Come quickly to help me. Deliver me from the sword, the dogs, the lions, and the wild bulls. If the church is called to live in the place poised between memory and hope, then David too is in that place. In the final part of the psalm, he expresses the hope that his desperate cries will be heard because they are addressed to the God who listens. I will declare your name to my brothers. In the congregation, I will praise you. He invites all Israel, God's covenant people, to join him in praising the Lord. The praise is due to God because he has not despised or disdained the suffering of his afflicted one, but has listened to the desperate cry for help. He in faith looks forward to the time when God will be praised in a great gathering of the people, probably in the temple. He expands his view from Israel and sees a great company that includes the poor and the rich from all over the world, coming to bow before and worship the Lord as he rules over the nations. And he looks forward to God being rightly praised by successive generations, even those not born yet. Psalm 22 is a wonderful psalm, and I particularly love the way it holds that space between memory and hope. It clearly comes out of a very dark place where all seems lost. But it is in precisely that place of despair, that David models for us the hand reaching out to memory, God's character and saving actions in the past, and the other hand reaching towards hope, expressing trust that the dark present and the silence of God currently felt are not the end of the story. Psalm 22, as we know, was written by King David. But it is worth noticing that this psalm has a very deep connection to Jesus, the Son of David. The opening lines of this psalm were quoted by Jesus from the cross as he was undergoing physical and spiritual torment, enduring separation from his heavenly Father, as he took upon himself the sins of the world. The early church picked up the remarkable similarities between this psalm and the experience of Jesus. Jesus on the cross was surrounded by people who mocked his trust in God. The description of being poured out like water, with the bones all out of joint and the tongue sticking to the roof of the mouth, when combined with "they have pierced my hands and feet," sound remarkably like a man undergoing crucifixion. And the detail about dividing up the condemned man's clothes and casting lots for them fits very well with the behavior of the Roman soldiers immediately after they had crucified Jesus and had torn his clothes from him. Psalm 22 is quoted extensively in the Gospels because of its obvious link to the crucifixion. In wrapping up our consideration of this psalm today, I want to tie together all these strands. The church, you recall, is called to live poised between memory and hope. David models this stance, reaching back to the actions of God that demonstrate his faithfulness in the past, and reaching forward to the hope of rescue. As we learn to stand in that place, we discover that it is actually cruciform. Jesus overlays his experience of the cross on this psalm, modeling that position, poised between memory and hope. And here's the thing. The Apostle Paul reminds us in Galatians 2:20 that we have been crucified with Christ, and that the life we now live is actually Christ living in us. God is intent on stamping the image of his Son into our lives. So our lives should look cruciform too. And this morning I want to suggest that whenever we find ourselves in a place of deep need, in our crying out to God for rescue, we are never left alone as long as we too can look back in memory and forward in hope. May the Lord encourage us to be people of prayer, shaped in his image.